Okay. All right, so I'm trying something for the first time so that I can still see my notes. Okay, does this slide look normal to you?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so we will do it this way. Are we recording?
Yes.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone. Today we are going to be doing a workshop on the academic path. So you're here because presumably you're interested in staying in academia after your bachelor's degree. So we're going to discuss some of the realities of that and also some really important things for your next steps if this is what you want for your life. So we're going to be discussing planning, requirements, statistics, things like that. So hopefully this is helpful to you and that you take away something from it that's useful. Okay, so what is the big picture? It's like, what is a career supposed to be? So in theory, your career should do these things. It should align with your personal values. It should allow for other types of goals in your life besides professional ones. It should rely primarily on stuff that you're good at. It should allow or provide avenues for your personal and professional development, so advancement, so to speak. It should feel rewarding or worthwhile, preferably most of the time. And it should provide sufficient financial security for the way that you want to live. So all of these things are factors that you should take into account with any sort of career decision. So we're going to talk about some of these things just specifically where academia is concerned. So why would you choose this path for your career? Hopefully you really like doing research. Hopefully you love reading papers and writing them. And hopefully you enjoy teaching and mentoring students, because these are basically the key components of this work, though there are a lot of other things you have to do too, like committee work and things like that. But most people don't necessarily enjoy those things. And you should want to do this type of thing. You should want to increase the knowledge of humankind in one really specific area, and maybe not by very much. You should want to be very autonomous in your own work, choosing what you get to work on, not having somebody tell you. And you should want to solve interesting problems. So if any of those things don't sound appealing to you, then you might want to look at a different path from academia. So what are some of the types of positions if you stay in academia? So some you're very familiar with, so mostly tenure track. So most people are interested in trying to be a professor at a 4-year or more institution. So you would call this a PI, meaning a principal investigator. It's someone who's getting funding through grants to do their research and generally has a research group. They probably have to teach classes and have grad students, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of your standard professor track. It's also possible to be a tenure track professor at a 2-year institution focused on teaching, like community college. So you can still get tenure and be a professor if you only teach. But there are also non-tenure track positions, for example, being an adjunct or lecturer, which I would not recommend if you want your career to be in academia. Usually by the time you're looking at adjunct jobs, it's time to leave and do something else. Those can't really support anyone financially, not in a meaningful way. You could be a lab manager, which can be a really fun job where your job is to sort of set up curriculum around, for example, the undergrad labs that you have to take in order to graduate. So usually someone gets paid to manage all of that. Or being research staff. So this is not super common in physics in academia. So like in other areas like biology and chemistry, you can actually get research staff jobs on somebody's grant. But in general, it's more common in a government lab if you're a physicist. So what we're going to be focusing on today is the first kind, being a professor at a 4-year plus type of institution. You're going to have grad students, the whole shebang. So what we're going to talk about is basically trying to lead to that rather than some of these other options. So what are the perks of a career in academia, meaning a professorship? Well, one of the biggest perks is the flexibility with schedule and work location. So what that means is it's not a 9 to 5, you're not clocking in and out. You work, your teaching schedule gives sort of a framework, but everything else is much more flexible about when you come in, when you go home. You might work late at night. But this can also be like not a perk, especially if you have a tendency to overdo it. So this can turn your job into an 80-hour-a-week type of thing if you go home and get on the couch and open your laptop up. So, but it also can fit well with family life in some ways. Like if you need to take your kid to a doctor's appointment in the afternoon, you can. And as far as work location goes, yes, you can work on your laptop on your couch. You're going to have to go in on some regular basis. That's part of your job. And for example, you have sabbatical years where you can go to another institution or something like that and work. So that type of flexibility is appealing to some people. Also, autonomy is the big one. So you get to decide what you're going to work on by the time you're a professor. Your research topics are what you choose. The methods are what you choose. You are in charge. So if you have a lot of good ideas about how to approach a problem and don't need someone else telling you how to do it, then this is very appealing to you. Whereas people who like to have a bigger framework or someone kind of lining up a task for them, being a PI might not be the best path to choose. Unrivaled job security. So that's once you have tenure. Being a tenured professor is probably one of the most secure jobs available in our country, maybe the most secure. But it's going to be at least 10 years from now when that is a possibility for you, and that's if everything goes well. So people don't always get tenure, especially in physics, for example. Sometimes the people you're trying to convince during your tenure review process are very stringent, and it can depend on your institution too. So you might notice that at Caltech and MIT, for example, many junior professors don't get tenure, and they end up going to some other university and they do just fine. But there are other schools where pretty much everyone who gets hired as a junior professor will end up getting tenure, simply because they're kind of vetting people at the beginning and have different standards. So travel, this might not be true anymore by the time y'all are in this job market to be a professor. After COVID, we don't know what's going to change, but at least up until COVID, there are a lot of conferences in exotic locations. You get to go all over the world. It's very romantic to be in physics and astronomy, for example, because of the conferences and stuff like that. So I don't know how that's going to change in the future, but that used to be one of the perks anyway. You get to collaborate with cool, smart people, some of the smartest people in the world. And that can be a perk for sure. And you get to support and develop cool and smart students. So that's really fun, getting to support people on their way up the ladder, particularly if things like mentorship appeal to you. All right, but what are the more challenging aspects of a career in academia? Okay, the big one is job insecurity. Before you are tenured, it's extremely insecure. So you're doing a lot of work and putting a lot of time in, and there's no telling where exactly it's going to go. So between grad school and your first tenure track position, meaning you don't have tenure yet, but you'll go up for review eventually, there could be up to 5 years of 1 to 2 year contract postdocs, and you have to move every time, probably, because you have to go where the jobs are, and there's no guarantee you're going to get a tenure track job. As far as location goes, academic jobs are pretty rare. So you have to go where the jobs are. So if you're attached to some geographical location, your chance of getting a tenure track job drops precipitously. If you can move, you can probably find a spot. Your dependence on senior people and advisors, we're going to come back to this again, but your letter writers have an outsized impact on your funding and or career progress for up to a decade after grad school. So if you have a bad advisor or someone who doesn't have anything good to say about you, that can severely impact your career progress. Funding, publish or perish. So this is kind of changing too. But at least in the last 10 to 20 years, it's been like more papers equals better. And now people are starting to get wise to that and care about quality and quantity. So y'all may not actually be dealing with this as much as people did 10 years ago, but it's still kind of there in the background, particularly in physics, this concept that more papers is better. That's not really true. You know, it's a cultural thing. Funding and income. So as you become a PI, your grant writing and or your teaching load can supersede your personal research. So many universities or research institutes won't pay you your whole salary. Like they have some salary and then the rest you have to make up either by teaching courses or through your own grant funding. And don't forget that your grants also have to pay for your grad students and your postdocs. So there's a lot of people relying on you for income. And professors generally don't make that much. So academia is not the path for you if you're looking to get rich. There are much easier ways to do that. Politics, so tenure, promotions, papers, grants, all of those things are awarded based on peer review. Your peers being other, you know, faculty members and researchers all over the world, all over the country. So for better or for worse, you probably will need to engage in politics of some kind at the department level, at the level of your subfield, et cetera, et cetera. That's a reality that probably can't be ignored. And managing and collaborating. So in a mature academic career, most of what you're doing is running your research group. You're not actually doing research anymore. You're not typing in code. You're making sure that everyone has the money they need and that your group has the money they need. You're the last author on papers that you don't know that much about. You're not really doing research yourself anymore. So if doing the research is what you deeply love, this all, like being a PI of a big group might not be the thing for you. But also it's a good impetus to work on your leadership skills because you're going to need them. Also, collaborating can be a good thing and a bad thing. Sometimes you get stuck collaborating with people that are not super compatible with you or not super helpful. It's just something that can be challenging and is worth working on your skills. So before we keep going, let's look at the job statistics. This is coming from AIP, who has done pretty exhaustive work trying to get in touch with people that are still working in physics, both in academia and in industry, and pulling statistics out of that to try to give people a sense of their career prospects. So I would recommend looking at these reports that are linked up here if you want to dig into it more. Okay, so there are a few takeaways here. For example, for physics PhDs, this is not astro, your chances of staying in academia are significantly higher than in other types of science. So for example, in what some people call the soft sciences, maybe 10% of graduates end up in a faculty position, whereas in physics, that's much higher. I'd say it's probably between 1/3 to like 40%. But let's look at the left first. So on the left are starting salaries right out of PhD. And it's obvious that you're going to make more money if you leave academia. So I want to make that point. This is a passion project. Postdocs might make something like $10,000 or $20,000 more than graduate students, and then junior professors might make $10,000 or $20,000 more than postdocs. There's not really a lot of range. So, just know that ahead of time. If you look at the upper right, this is the type of employment you can expect right out of your PhD. So about half of physics PhDs will be in postdocs, 40% in potentially permanent positions, which largely are going to be in industry or government, and then a few will do other things or not get a job. But this doesn't tell you much about career prospects. So the next image, which is on the bottom right, actually gives you a sense of prospects. So this shows career movement in the 10 years after completion of the PhD, but it doesn't include postdocing. So what you see on the left-hand side is like junior professors in industry jobs. And what you see on the right side is in the years after that, how many people switched which sector they were in. And what you'll notice is that there's not a ton of movement. What does that really mean? What that means is that if you want to stay in academia, you kind of don't want to take a trip, in some tangential area. You don't necessarily want to go into industry for a year or two. Generally, people who start in one sector stay in that sector. So that means that your career prospects are pretty stable, but it also means you might not want to like go work on the stock market for 2 years if what you really want to be as a professor. It's safer to just stay in academia. Okay, so I wanted to take 5 minutes to do some self-reflection. So just thinking about the things we just talked about, I wanted you to kind of answer these questions for yourself. So what are your personal values and priorities, and how do they fit in an academic career? What are your reasons for pursuing this path? And can you split them into external and internal reasons? So for an example of an external reason is like your parents told you you should do this. And an example for an internal reason is something like, I'm too scared to make a big decision right now, so grad school just seems like the easiest thing to do. And that's okay. Like if that's where you're at, nothing wrong with that. It's just good to know what it is for yourself. Also, every career has drawbacks, not just academia. So like any career I could show you is going to have challenges and drawbacks, but the ones in academia are very specific. What do you think about those? And also, how do you feel about the statistics? Do they make you feel optimistic about your prospects? Knowing that, you know, a little over half of you won't end up in academia? Or are you like, oh, that's pretty good odds, I'll make it? Okay, so we actually had a chance to discuss here offline, so we're just gonna move on. Do any of y'all have questions about the prior section?
Nope.
Okay, all right, moving right along. Okay, so now we're moving into career timeline, which is something that Ava actually sort of brought up, which is what is this going to look like? What's your time commitment to getting to a full career position? So again, this is specifically for PIs, meaning research-focused professors at 4+ year institutions. So y'all are in the middle of undergrad. That can take 4 to 5 years, depending on your situation. And in the final year, whether that's your senior year or a gap year or post-bac, you will want to take your GREs and apply to graduate schools and to the national fellowships that can pay for your grad school or pay you during grad school. Then during grad school, which will take you something like 5 to 6 years, in the second year, that's a big transition point because you've been taking courses, you have to pass some really big, hard exams, and you'll advance to candidacy. So you'll get your master's degree en route to PhD. That's the American model for this. And candidacy means that now you're working just on your thesis. No more classes, just research all the time. And then in your dissertation year, which is your final year, you will apply for fellowships, postdocs, and maybe faculty jobs. Most don't. In our field and in Astro, it is very uncommon for someone to go straight from PhD to a faculty job. It almost doesn't happen. So, you know, don't count on that. But if you came up with something really impactful and you've done a lot of good work, it could happen. Then during postdoc, typically you're going to postdoc for something like 2 to 5 years. You get to sort of, if you're lucky, you get to decide how long you're going to postdoc, meaning you're putting off looking for faculty jobs because you're happy. But for most people, it's the other way around. Like you want to postdoc as few years as possible because you're ready to get on the tenure track. So usually people postdoc something like 2 to 3 times, and you have a different contract each time. That could be like 1, 2, or 3 years, something like that. And on the last year of the contract, so this could mean like in your 1-year contract, you're already applying for your next postdoc. You will need to apply for fellowships, apply for more postdocs, or apply for faculty jobs. So once you've postdoced once, you're more or less ready to go on the job market, but you get a couple chances. So at the end of each contract, you're going to try again. And, you know, we assume you're going to be successful. So then you get hired as junior faculty, as an assistant professor, again, US model. and you're junior faculty for something like 5 to 7 years. It is possible to go up for tenure review early at some schools, which you would initiate, but typically it's something like 5, 6 years. You go up for tenure review and submit an exhaustive portfolio full of everything you've ever done. The CV has everything and all your curriculum materials and all the service work you've done. It's everything. They want to see everything. And then hopefully you get promoted to tenure. And then you've done it. You are a senior faculty member. And now you're finally there. So if we look at how many years this took from the time you started undergrad, I mean, 20 years. So, I mean, keep in mind that by the time you are a tenured faculty member, that's basically the top of your game. So it's not crazy that it takes 20 years. If you look at other people, like when do they get to like executive level or like top managerial positions or something, it's not uncommon for it to take until you're 40 years old. So in that context, it's not that crazy, but it sure is a lot of school compared to those people. So if you want to be in academia, you probably like school. And actually, you can keep going from here. So if you've made it to senior faculty, if you're interested in being an administrator at a university, you can keep going. So you could try to be dean or provost or vice chancellor and stuff like that. You can move to a different university and get a pay bump. There's stuff like that you can do. And I know this is like a lot to take in. We're not going to worry about all of this. So what is the thing that you can control right now? It's this transition right here, undergrad to graduate school, whatever that looks like for you. So that's where we're going. Okay.
Oh, yeah. A quick question in the chat. Yeah. Gennaro asked, so we're doing research for 3 to 4 years for a PhD in graduate school.
Oh, good question. So this actually depends on a couple different factors, which I'll bring up in just a minute.
Thank you.
So the number of years that you'll be doing research. So, but remind me of it in like one slide. Okay, so the transition to grad school, the first thing I wanted to cover is that physics and astro are different. So I am a PhD student in an astronomy and astrophysics program, but this is really the only astronomy program I applied to. Everything else was a physics program. And it was a big jump for me to move over to astro. So I want to make sure y'all know the difference because it wasn't so clear to me before. So in physics, you're going to take generalized physics coursework. So you're going to take dedicated quantum classes, thermal classes, like it looks very similar to the curriculum you're accustomed to. It's just harder. And in general, this is more from a cultural perspective. The exams and course requirements in physics PhD programs are much more stringent and competitive. Many still view their course as like a weed out course, stuff like that. So you can expect more of that, like prove yourself type of culture. That's not true in all departments. You'll find some that are becoming more sort of warm and friendly and inclusive, but not everywhere. The culture is generally less open-minded and less female. That is not a judgment. That's just reality for the demographics the way they are right now. It's changing. Okay. You can work on any thesis topic from a physics department, including astro topics. So you're much more wide open on what you can do research on. And ultimately your prospects is that you can be a professor in lots of different types of departments. So physics PhDs get hired in applied math departments, in astro departments, in physics departments, sometimes even in like chemistry or earth and planetary science departments. You have a lot of options as a physics PhD, depending on the expertise of your thesis work. If you go into an astro program, I would call all the courses applied physics. So what's happening is that each course takes a bunch of different physics topics and connects it to a really specific physics problem, like stars or diffuse medium or radiative transfer. So it just takes like many different areas and you have to know all of them to like look at each different type of astrophysical system. So having a very solid physics foundation is super important if you're going to astro. Namely, you want to be really solid on thermal physics and fluids if you can be when you get started. If you're not, you'll catch up. It's just going to hurt a little bit. So in general, in astro departments, and this is true here too, exam and course requirements are way more casual. It doesn't mean they're not hard exams or hard classes. It's just they're not generally trying to get rid of students in those things. Like, they want you to succeed. So it's set up in such a way that is more conducive to getting students through their program. I wouldn't say that makes the bar lower. I would say it's an attempt at inclusivity. Because not everyone is like a sit-down exam person, you know. Okay, in general, astro culture is more open-minded and more female. And I want to note that that's relative to physics, not relative to other sciences, because astro and physics are both pretty bad in this arena versus other types of sciences. The other limitation that comes with getting an astro PhD is that you're much more limited in your career prospects. You're generally not going to be hired in a physics department because you haven't taken graduate physics. So, you know, if you get hired in a physics department, it's because they need someone to teach astro classes or fill that niche, but you're not going to get to teach quantum mechanics if you didn't take graduate level physics courses. So I didn't know that coming in. Now I know, and I'm not in any mood to go in and take a physics graduate course load. So my dream of teaching quantum to undergrads is gone. But you can know that ahead of time. Okay, oops. All right, so now's when we get into like the years of research that we were talking about. I want to talk about what the international options are, because you do not have to go to grad school in the United States. So the European model is different than the US model. It's a 2-year master's, which is separate from the PhD. And it's often tuition free depending what country you go to, but you have to come up with the money for your living expenses. And then there's a 3-year PhD that is like a job advertisement that you apply for, and it's on a specific project. So you don't choose your thesis. You would like look at the PhDs on offer and be like, oh, that project looks like something I can do. And then you would apply specifically to that PhD position with that project. And there's no flexibility. It's like 3 years, done. So you better get it done. But the pay is good. People do well. So, I mean, I know PhD students in Europe who were able to like buy a house, have a family, like things are pretty different over there. You can also like sort of transfer from the US to the European model. So I have a friend who did this. He did his undergrad in the US, but did a pretty serious thesis with his bachelor's degree. So I would say you would need a master's level thesis. It's on independent research. It's written up, preferably published or close to being published. He got into a PhD. He got a PhD position straight away. He just applied to that PhD position. His thesis work gave him the tools to be able to do that project. They hired him for that PhD. 3 years out of undergrad, he's got a PhD. Done. Didn't have to take classes or anything. So that's a possibility. And I wouldn't discount going over there, especially if you have means to get through the master's degree. You can also get through the master's portion here in the US and then apply. And, you know, someone will probably be disappointed that you're leaving, but you're allowed to do that. Oh, to answer the question that you had. So if you're in the US, the number of years you're doing research really depends. So most programs now want you to start doing research right away, even though it's not great to always have to do that and grad classes at the same time. So you could be doing research for every year of your PhD, but there are other programs that want you to focus on coursework first. Namely, they told me this in the Berkeley physics program, that they prefer that you sort of dabble in research, but focus on your courses in the first 2 years, and then spend the next 4 years doing research. And those people do very well. So it kind of depends on the program, and they'll tell you when you show up. Okay, so what do you need to get into grad school? This is just totally standard. You need to have done research, preferably published, but doesn't have to be. You need good letters of rec from people that know you. So it's good to develop some relationships with your professors. You need some personal and research statements, which you will write. And you probably need to take the GRE and PGRE, though they're, times are changing. Maybe you won't need that anymore. Okay, but we want to move into how you're going to choose which program is right for you. So these are the programs you'll apply to. Ultimately, this will help you choose which one you enroll in. It really needs to be about you. Okay, so what are your interests, your needs? What are your ambitions? What physics questions really pique your interest? Are there senior people that you've met with that you really want to work with? So for me, who my advisor is mattered a lot more than what I was researching, but that might not be true for you. Do you think you need your own office? Some grad programs have everyone in a big room together. Some don't have grad offices. Some, like here, might have like 2 to 3 grads in an office. Is it important for you to have a window in your office? Like in 5 years, that might matter. So do you need competition from other students to motivate you to do well? Or does that type of pressure feel really stifling to you? I met a prospective grad for the Astro program here who, after the visit, told me he knew he was not going to come to Santa Cruz because no one cared about like being better than each other. So like he wanted that competitive thing, wasn't going to find it in this Astro program. Also, are there other life factors that matter to you? So do you need like city nightlife to be happy? Do you need hiking trails or a place to go surfing? Do you need the support of like an identity-based community? Do you have children or parents you need to support? So you need a good financial package. All of these things should help you direct your search and your final decision. So I think it helps to have all of these things in order before you start. And when you start visiting programs, don't let them romance you. Like, don't believe the hype. Your needs need to be the thing that's guiding you, not the program trying to sell itself, so to speak. Okay, so I want to take 5 minutes to do some self-reflection. And Ava, you can pause the recording if you want. Okay, so now that we have thought about like our own needs and what we're looking for, how do you figure out which program is the right one for you? How do you find them, right? In general, you're going to get advice to apply to like 10 or 12 programs. You may not really need that many. It's just always good to have options. So I would say start by collecting like 24 or so programs that you're sort of interested in, and then narrow it down as you get closer to writing applications. So this list is in order of actual helpfulness. So the best way to figure out what programs might be a fit for you is to go through people you know and actually talk to them about it. So if you're lucky, you know grad students already that are at other schools, but that might be unlikely. Next on the list is professors or research advisors you already work with. They will know about other schools and programs, what they're working on, what their strengths are, and they could know students actually they could connect you with to talk to. Doing REUs is very helpful because then you actually get to see a different environment and work with other people. Many REUs actually kind of design it to try to get you to apply to their own school. So that's a good way to figure out if you like being there or not. Colloquium speakers, when they come visit and you get a chance to do lunches or something, you can talk to them about their institutions, do they have students, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be a good way to just have a conversation. I'm applying to grad school soon. I want to talk to you about what you have going on at such and so. Also, conferences like QIP are a good opportunity to talk to new people, but QIP is also mostly undergrads. So they're not going to really have their finger on the pulse of what life is like for the graduate students, but it's a start. I would say in the least helpful category is really looking at department websites and at gradschoolshopper.com. So they are there if you're just starting from scratch. But they can't really tell you that much. So if you really care about research area, those can be a good place to start, so you at least know who you're supposed to be learning about, or trying to figure out if they might be a good advisor. But honestly, understanding the culture or what your life's going to be like, useless. So all right, so before we move on, I wanted to talk about gap years, just in case anyone's thinking about that. So what is the impact that a gap year actually has on your grad school prospects? So there are two ways to do a gap year, and I call it taking a year off and taking it a year on. So if you take a year off, it's probably good for you in a holistic way. And you can get some real world experience, especially if you travel or go get a job. You could find out if there are other careers that you like. You can learn more about yourself outside the academic context. Many undergrad students have never been out of school. If you went straight from high school to college, you don't know yourself outside an academic context, so might be a good chance to figure it out. But some programs you're applying to are going to look at a gap year taken off negatively. Not every program does. But if you can explain the role that it played in directing what you want to do as a scientist, you can probably get away with it. So taking a year on, like a bridge program or a post-bac, is viewed very favorably by almost every grad school program. It can be very intellectually demanding, and right out of undergrad, you still want to have some stamina if you're going to go straight into research like this. However, it's way more informative about a career in academia and what that's actually like than your undergrad degree was. Because being a student and taking courses ultimately is not anything like this actual job. So this is a chance for you to start figuring that out and get a real feel for it. You could also split the difference. So for example, if you have the money to take a year off and you want to go travel to India or something, you could try to keep some of your undergrad research going in the meantime, like work on writing the paper, getting it published, or have some way to show that you're still engaged in science somehow, like have some conversations, contact advisors, like just sort of stay on the radar. So you can kind of do both. All right, actual grad school. Not the application part. So financial outlook. So these are in order of earning the least to earning the most in general. There are exceptions. These are how you're going to pay your bills during grad school. As graduates in the hard sciences, you will not have to pay for this unless you go to Europe for your master's or something, or you get swindled by some master's program or something, but y'all probably aren't heading in that direction. So if you really have no funding source, you can TA. In general, you will have some kind of guaranteed income for fall and spring. Most schools are not on the quarter system, but it can be tough to get a summer appointment, which could bump up your income, but also summer is some of the best time to get work done. They are funded by whatever university you're at. Next is GSR or an RA-ship, where you're just doing research and getting paid to do research, usually all summer. Or sometimes you'll get that for the summer if you're TAing the rest of the year. And these are funded by your advisor. So they have grant money that they are using to pay you to do research. Then there are fellowships, which can be for 1 year or multiple years, that are university funded. And this way you don't have to TA in order to make money and pay your bills. You're just doing research, but you're also not governed by a union or anything like that. Not that all schools have unions, but some do. And then there's national fellowships, where your money's actually coming from some external, generally government agency, but not necessarily. And they will more or less guarantee that you have funding for all of grad school. So you'll be making a bigger paycheck. Sometimes there are bonuses from the university for bringing one of these national fellowships. So you'll actually get like 10 grand a year more on top of that. So you can live pretty comfortably on fellowship. It's definitely worth applying for these, especially if you've done some research and can communicate about it. I'd give it a shot. And I've just put the names and links to some of the main national fellowships here. Post-bac programs. How do you find out about post-bac programs? Well, honestly, you can find out about bridge programs online pretty easily. If you look up physics bridge program on Google, you're going to get a lot of information. Postbacks tend to be jobs. So what I would advise is that you try to look at job boards. I'll give you a link at the end of the workshop where you can actually see the job boards hosted by like AIP and SPS, and that's where you're going to see postbac type positions. Also, being in groups on Facebook. I've been on a couple like physics and early career type of Facebook groups, and when someone posts a postbac position, they'll generally put it on Facebook, but I would start with the AIP and SPS job boards. So I'll give you a link in a little bit. Okay. So surviving grad school, what do I wish I had known? So this is literally just me, so very subjective, looking back at what I've learned over the last 4 years and saying, well, what would have impacted my decisions if I'd known about it? So this is what they are. Sorry, this is a big list, but you know, it's key. So during prospective visits, so this is after you've gotten in and you're going to visit, listen to your gut. So if something feels weird or off, it probably is. Don't ignore sort of that intuition part of yourself. Take everything into account. Don't let it be the dominant voice. Just let it be included in your decision making. I feel very lucky in that I felt right about this place, and a couple things fell in line with my advisor, et cetera. But I know people who sort of didn't listen to their gut feeling and ended up somewhere they were really unhappy, and it really can interrupt this career trajectory. So your grad school experience is shaped much more by your advisor than by the program itself. This is true. Okay, you and your advisor, that is a very important relationship. And even in a great program, you can still get a crap advisor. Or even you could just be paired with an advisor that is really good for one type of person, but not good for you. So be aware of that when you're making that decision, and that ultimately, especially if you're not worried about pedigree, then this matters less, but really think about it. Also, don't rely on your advisor as like your one and only source of support. You need to seek out and develop relationships with other faculty so that you have different points of contact for different types of needs you might have. Not all project ideas are good. So this is a big one. Make sure your master's project, which is that first one in the first 2 years, is really well defined. If it's not well defined, don't do it. Be like, I want to do something else. And if you've been working on it and you figure out that it's not well defined, like very open-ended, stop and be like, this is too open-ended. I want something more well defined. It's hard sometimes to figure out what questions can be answered that way. It seems very abstract, but it's so important to getting that first paper out. You'll save yourself a lot of heartache. Most students think about quitting near the end of year 2. I've found this to be the case even in very good programs where people are very supported. So the way I explained it to Ava is that there's nothing like physics grad school to take the smartest people in the world and make them feel like the stupidest people on earth. You really go through the meat grinder because you've worked so hard and learned so much, and you're still very far from being an expert in your area. And you kind of have to just go through that valley before you can come up the other side. But just know that it's a common experience, and that you always have a choice too. So don't feel alone in that. It's normal to ask yourself, am I even cut out for this? Am I good enough to do this? That's totally normal. And honestly, if you just stick around long enough, you'll get good enough at it. So speak up. If you don't understand something, don't pretend that you do. Okay. And this is often in advisor meetings where they're talking to you about your first project and you're kind of like, oh, this is a lot of stuff I didn't study before. Just say you don't understand. Can you explain it to me? Because like I wrote here, your ego will recover, but your research might not if you're flying blind, meaning if you don't understand and you're still forging forward, you can go a long way in the wrong direction. You are not trapped. It is your PhD, so you get to decide what you want to do. You can change what you're working on. You can change who you're working with. You can even change degree programs. You can change institutions, and you can still be successful and have a career in academia. Many famous people did exactly that. Like they did a master's in astrophysics and then were like, actually, I want to do string theory. And then they switched to a physics program and everything's fine and they're professors now. So you can do that. Don't back yourself in a corner. That's not a real thing. Make the effort to learn project and time management and find software tools that'll help you do that. It's just going to make life easier and less things will slip through the cracks. Take notes and bibliography on all your lit review from day one. Nobody does this, but everyone should, because it's just going to save time later and it's going to help you come back to things that you don't understand or that you forgot. And it's going to help you become more masterful in the literature faster. So just try. And also take time for other things. Take care of yourself. Don't feel shame for doing stuff that isn't work. You're just going to burn out if you just go and go and go. It's very important to take time to just go have your head in another direction. Go rock climbing, go exercise, go for a walk, go for a trip. Don't feel bad about it. Okay. The one thing that we sort of haven't talked about yet, and I know we're over time, but I want to get through it, is this whole advisor thing. We keep coming back to it. It's very important. If I told you it was the most important, that wouldn't be hyperbole, because they have so much control over the direction your career can take. That relationship is vital. So keep in mind, it's a long relationship. If you stay in academia, you're going to rely on them for guidance and support for like 6 years while you get your PhD. And then you're going to rely on them for letters of rec for all your postdoc applications and possibly even for your tenure review. And that means that that relationship is going to last longer than most marriages do. So choose wisely, okay? So step one, as usual for me, is know yourself. What are your needs? What do you want? What are you looking for? And you need to be honest with yourself, because if you're not, you're going to end up with someone that's incompatible. And, you know, at the best end of the spectrum, you're going to waste time. And at the worst end of the spectrum, it could cause you to ruin your grad school experience and quit. So we're not going to try to answer these questions right now. I just want you to think about it. So these are the you questions. Like, what sort of difference in hierarchy are you looking for in an advisor? Are you self-motivated, or do you do better if someone's kind of keeping up with you and being like, where's that plot I asked for? What kind of pace of work or level of stress works for you? Some people need a little bit of a burn to like keep them going. Me, I become a wilting flower if there's too much pressure. So everybody's different. Do you prefer a very business type relationship? Do you want a really warm and fuzzy relationship? Do you want a lot of one-on-one time where you get to see them a lot and talk to them a lot about your science and everything else? Or do you kind of want to do your own thing and just check in every once in a while? What size of group do you want to work in? Do you care if your advisor has 10 other students or 2 other students? Generally, the amount of time they have to spend with you correlates negatively with the size of the group. So, you know, as you can imagine, if they have many students to support, no one's going to get like a ton from them. Also, demographics. Do you care how old your advisor is, or how famous they are, or other factors? It's good to know. Be honest with yourself, okay? No judgment. Okay, so now that you've figured out the you part, now you have to figure out like who they are. So this list is in order, again, of helpfulness. So from most helpful to least helpful. I want to emphasize that you should listen to your gut once you actually get to meet this person. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably not, okay? But you can also get advisors that feel really great to talk to, but like don't have student outcomes that you like. So for example, if you love them, but a lot of their students or most of their students end up in industry and you really don't want that, then maybe that's not the right person. So yeah, the best way to figure it out is to get to know them personally and talk to them and have meetings and stuff. If that's not possible, try to talk to some of their current students. If that's not possible, read their Twitter feed. You can learn a lot about somebody based on what they've put online. Of course, not every professor has a Twitter feed, but many do now. Speak to faculty that you already know that might know them or know them by reputation. You can get some information that way. Again, look at the outcomes of their former students. You can usually look at who they were on a university's website or their personal website, or you can figure it out based on who they've written papers with, and you can see where they've ended up going. Like it's kind of like detective work, but it's not that hard on archive or something. You can go on YouTube and see if they have recorded lectures or interviews. You can at least get a sense of their personality type usually. If they're very sort of like cold and formal, or if they're warm and fuzzy, you can kind of tell. Or look at press they've done. So if they have news releases and stuff like that, interviews, etc. Or if they've done a lot of outreach, usually there will be some press related to outreach efforts also. Identify their research area through their website or through Lit Review. Least helpful, but at least you can figure out what they're working on. Okay. One thing I want to note before we finish up is that in our field, abuse does exist. And even in places where the issues don't amount to abuse from advisor to student, poor leadership and management issues still abound because none of these people get leadership or mentorship training unless they seek it out themselves. And that's a relatively recent occurrence. So you can definitely run into problems, even if it's just like they're a poor manager or they don't know how to mentor properly. You just want to be aware of those things as you're getting to know people. Get as much information as you can. Okay, so I don't think we're going to do the breakout rooms, but this is the last exercise that I would like y'all to do in your own time, which is to come up with a list of questions that you would ask upon meeting a potential advisor. So let's say you got into all your dream schools, you're going on the visits. What could you ask them that would help you assess their working style, how much time they're going to have to meet with you, what their priorities are. Are their grad students their top priority? Is their postdoc that top priority? Is teaching their top priority? It's good for you to get a sense of that. But I mean, there are plenty of other questions you could ask too. You're trying to find out if you are a fit with them. It's almost like speed dating. So that's where we will end. And I just want to say good luck to you in your endeavors. And for extra resources, honestly, the best place to go is this AIP website. It's specifically for physicists. It's almost the only thing out there that's specifically for us and can give you lots of information about the statistics. It's got job boards for different levels. So the SPS job board is available here, which is jobs for people with physics bachelor's degrees. But it also has the higher tier jobs in a separate job board too, as well as tons of information about career planning, skill assessments, transitions to industry, et cetera, et cetera. So it's pretty exhaustive. So thank you very much. And I hope this has been helpful to you.
Thank you so much. Let's see, I think there is a question in the chat from Lillian. Yeah, she asked if it would be appropriate to ask to meet a professor before you apply to the school.
Yeah, they don't have to say yes. But I also wouldn't predicate it in the way where you're like, I want to figure out if you're a jerk. Will you do a Zoom chat with me? Like,
you can tell.
Yeah, I would definitely say something like, I'm applying for grad school next year and I'm figuring out which programs I'm interested in. I noticed your research on X, Y, and Z, and I'm really interested in that, and specifically these parts that connect with this thing that I do or that I know about. Would you be open to having a chat with me? I could bounce some ideas off of you and ask you about your program. Like, you know, so you want to kind of ground it on a scientific basis, but they also understand, because if they have room for students, they might kind of be interviewing you too. So it could actually help you get into that program.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Did y'all have any questions about sort of the end here, like the sort of like what I wish I'd known and advisor stuff before we go?